I hold two things, especially on the issue of race. I hold two things in two truths in tandem. One of them is the fact that, like, yeah, historically, black people in America, around the world, but specifically America, have been oppressed. And whether or not there are specific rules on the book that still remain, a lot of people would argue there aren't. What I know is that there's still the lingering implications of historically, like, intentionally systematic oppression of black people, right? At the end of the day, like, you can't abuse somebody for so long and then, like, slap them keep slapping them, and then their cheek is hurting, and you say, like, why are you complaining? Like, I stopped slapping. It's like, bro, but my cheek still hurt. You feel me?
Sure.
And so I hold that to be true, but at the same time, I'm very entrepreneurially minded, and I also know that at the end of the day, like, what humans care about the most is value, and humans care the most about, like, can you deliver a product or a service that's so good that I can't help but compensate you whether or not I like you. You feel me? And so my experience, similar to yours, has been that where, thankfully speaking, I've done okay. I've done okay. You get what I'm saying? And I've always striven to deliver excellence and deliver quality and not expect or not demand anything simply because I'm black or simply because I'm part of a social group. You feel me? Yeah. And so I hold these two things, but it's a nuanced view where people are on one camp. People expect that if you attest to the fact that, like, yeah, black people have been historically oppressed, and that means you also have to believe that we are owed certain things. And if I say, I don't necessarily think so, I'm automatically other with the group that I thought I was in. Right. And at the same time, on the other side, you're going to have people who are going to want to use me as a token and be like, well, you see, this black guy believes that everything is okay and nothing. I'm like, bruh, I'm not saying that either. Right. And so I remember when we had that interaction the first time, I'm like, bruh, like, if I say how I really feel, I don't know if this guy's going to immediately other me.
Right.
Because I'm like, I don't know who this brother is. And I think we both realize that we like to think theologically about things. We like to think logically, and we like to think in a nuanced way, right? And actually have conversation as opposed to just, and we're not afraid to disagree. Like, we can disagree with each other, right? And I was like, yeah, this brother gets it. This brother is nuanced. He's mature in the way he thinks. He's not dogmatic in how he holds his views. And he's just a good guy. And I think that was one of those things I was like, yeah, this guy's good.
I appreciate that, man. Like, basically, like, I realized that, holding a nuanced view, there was a point at which I was dogmatic about that stuff. There was a point where I was just not willing to hear anybody on the lingering effects, right?
Yeah.
Like, I wasn't willing to hear anybody on that because because of the way I grew up, and I grew up with people complaining, and I'm looking around and I'm thinking to myself, you're complaining about this, but I'm observing that the problem you have is you, not that. And so my visceral reaction to that has been,
like a knee-jerk reaction.
Yeah, I don't want to hear anything about somebody else. Like, fix you. You didn't grow up through Jim Crow. Like, don't talk to me about Jim Crow because you didn't grow up through Jim Crow.
Right.
You wearing Nikes right now. You talking junk to me at school because I don't have Nikes on.
Right.
But you want to talk about you oppressed?
Right. And that's where the nuance and the unpacking has to happen because, like, yeah, you didn't live through Jim Crow. But your parents, or maybe not your parents, your grandparents did. And if your parents lived through Jim Crow, if your grandparents lived through Jim Crow, that means the economic opportunities that they had access to were limited, which in God's providential will, because this is the other part of the thing. You and I are believers, so we also come with that perspective, right?
Yes.
But if we're to marry two things together, like, we're like, okay, your grandparents grew up under Jim Crow. I think I'm getting my timelines right.
My dad, when he was a kid, Jim Crow was still in effect. So he grew up through some Jim Crow.
Exactly. So
he's been through real stuff.
Exactly. So your parents and your grandparents, which means they had a limited scope of economic opportunities, which means that you were statistically more likely to be born at a disadvantage, meaning that just the simple resources that others who grew up who were white. You just didn't have those opportunities to start. That's not to say there's no responsibility on you to try to better yourself. It's just, I just know that if you're in certain districts, you just don't have certain things available to you. And the simplest example I can give is like, if you're in a bad, if you're not in a disadvantaged community, even if you want to better yourself, even if you want to go to the library, where's the library closest to you? Is the library closest to you well funded and have the resources you need to even quote, and I hate this expression, pull yourself up by your bootstraps? But I understand the sentiment behind it.
Yeah.
But I think it's just been so used and so abused as to
Sure.
dismiss the other side of lingering effects, which is why when again, this has also been a growth in my understanding, because again, like I understand I'm not American. And so I come to the conversation with a measure of humility. Like there's stuff I need to learn. Right. But the whole pull yourself up by your bootstraps thing has been used to dismiss the fact that no, realistically, even if somebody did want to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, it's harder for them.
Yeah.
Because they can't just go to a library somewhere.
Yeah.
We have the internet now. But you understand what I'm saying? Like their schools are underfunded, under-resourced, because they were born in certain environments. And those environments are the way that they are as a combination of both external forces and individual decisions, both have worked together. Right. And so the idea, and so like so when I think about the issue now, I think about it in terms of lingering consequences.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like how do we help people? How do I empower people who are in positions where 2-3 generations down the line, they are still suffering a combination of historic systemic oppression and bad decisions?
Yes. Yes. And that's the nuance.
That's the nuance.
And a lot of times people don't want to own the decision side of it, right? Because they think that that's handing who they view as the oppressor, the enemy. That's handing them a W that they don't want to hand them, even if it's true that there are decisions. Yeah,
it's both and, right?
It's a both and situation. It's like I can acknowledge that, like, you know, this kid who grows up in this impoverished area, or grows up in an area that's not necessarily impoverished, but because of the fact that like just there's not generational knowledge necessarily of how to advance. Right. That it is going to be harder for that person, because I have experienced that. Right. Where I will be hanging out with my white friends who make the same amount of money as me, but their understanding of stuff is definitely advanced as far as finances and how to get ahead. Like their understanding is advanced beyond mine.
Because their communities are steeped in that knowledge historically for generations.
Yes. And so I start asking questions like, yo, where did you learn this? Like, oh, we used to talk about this at home. I'm like, all right.
But that's what I'm talking about. I think that's the nuance. And I think both sides need to acknowledge that it's both and, right? Yeah. So like the kid who grows up in, let's just call it like maybe not impoverished, but just doesn't have access to certain knowledge, and it's harder for him. Like that stuff doesn't just flow to him by osmosis. Right. Right. He has to work harder.
That's right.
Which kind of gives some credence to the whole thing. Like we got to work twice as hard to get half the results. I don't know whether I agree with that.
I don't agree with it, but I understand the sentiment.
The sentiment, right?
Yes.
And then you take it one step further and you look at the kids who do grow up in impoverished environments, and I can look at you and say like, bro, I know that all you've seen are your uncles and your father and your grandfather go this way of the streets, and so you feel as though that's your only option. And I can empathize and feel sad for you and be like, bro, like, I'm so sorry you had to make that decision because you felt like that was all that was available to you. The only role models were the drug dealers. Yep. But at the same time, I have to hold you accountable for the fact that you chose to go what the Bible would call the path of unrighteousness.
That's exactly right. And that's what I was going to say, because God still holds you accountable.
God still holds you. That's it.
God still holds you accountable.
Yeah.
We don't get to play the, well, that's all I ever saw modeled to me. Mm-hmm. The scriptures are basically going to flay you open.
Mm-hmm. No matter where you're from.
Like, I mean, Romans 1. No man has any excuse.
No, exactly. Right? Exactly.
Like, and basically, if you knew your master's will and you did it and you didn't do it, you're going to get a severe punishment.
Yeah.
But if you didn't know your master, which he's talking about himself, he's talking, Paul through the Spirit is talking about God.
Yeah.
if you didn't know your master's will, and you did what was evil, essentially, you'll get fewer lashes, but you still get lashes.
Yeah.
You still getting a beat down.
Yeah.
So the issue is that God is saying he's put enough on the inside of us, even in our fallen state, to know, even though we suppress the truth and unrighteousness, to know we're doing wrong. Exactly. We know we're doing wrong. Yeah. And we choose to suppress that.
Absolutely. Eternity is written on the hearts of men as well. Like, so,
Bam.
And again, like, this is why I love the scriptures, man, because like people try to simplify the scriptures, but it's when it says it's giving us everything pertaining to life and godliness, it's because it's giving us everything pertaining to life and godliness.
Amen.
So it'll cite Romans 1, right? But it'll also cite James, I think 4:27, where it says, religion that the Father finds faultless is to care for orphans and widows in their time of need and to remain unstained from the world.
Yes.
Yes. And so it's both, and it's like you can hold a person responsible for their actions, not even because I do it, because God does, but you can also show compassion to the person and say, like, I understand how you felt like this was your only option,
right?
But it wasn't.
It wasn't.
It wasn't.
And deep down, you knew that.
You knew that as well, right? And this may be controversial to some people, but I will say, in a sense, you picked the easy path.
Yes. That's exactly right.
And it feels harsh saying that, and it feels uncompassionate saying that. Like, what do you mean I picked the easy path? I ain't seen nothing but this, that in my environment. I got these people against me, and I can't even do this, and this even if I wanted. Be that as it may, the path of unrighteousness is the broad road. It's still the easier path.
It's still the easy path.
The more difficult thing would be to... And it's God that empowers. I say this not from a high horse because I know, like, but for the grace of God, there go I. You know what I'm saying? So I'm just saying it as a reality. Like, it's God that empowers us to do this. But the harder thing is to trust God and pursue righteousness and pursue discipline, even if that's the more difficult thing. Yeah.
I'll admit it. Yeah, I get it. You been holding me down for a minute.